Welcome to the Victoria Rumble Room, one of life's little pleasures, where we look at issues from Victoria's standpoint, British Columbia, Canada, and the wide, wonderful world. And across that globe, or at least across town, is John Juricic, the Croatian sensation. How you doing, John?
I tell you, we're going to have to go into one of them rockets that shoot out to beyond the universe, because we've covered basically the solar system.
Well, we are in the World Wide Web, right?
We certainly are.
Absolutely.
That was a great intro. Hey, I'm doing great. Sunny. I had a nice bike ride this morning. Olympics are over. Kind of sad. However, lots on our plates.
Well, it was nice to see Serbia win that gold medal in water polo. I'm sure you were cheering for them, John. So there's always exciting things going on when it's Olympic season.
I was cheering for them.
With your teeth gritted, right? Anyway.
Congratulations to the water polo champions.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Anyway, there is so much going on, John. And one of the things we're hearing so much rumble, people on the edge of their seats. When is the writ going to be dropped in Ottawa? Right? When do we start our federal election? I think all the betting money is saying it's going to be a September election date. So it's going to launch off here sometime in August, and we'll be watching that closely and covering it, I think, once it gets underway, certainly watching it from a vantage point where we're not picking sides, but we're going to try to get some good answers on how this election is unfolding. And I've already said, I think Justin Trudeau is going to win this election. I can't see that that's going to change, but we'll just see what happens.
Well, there's a really unique perspective, Robin, around this one. And for those of us who've been around the block, you and I have been around the block, and we have seen any number of politicians come and be involved with their activities. And one of them is Elizabeth May out here on the Saanich and the Gulf Islands. And what is ostensibly the complete collapse of the Green Party recently. So I'm very interested to know where that vote, which for us locally, where that's going to go. And very much looking forward to the writ being dropped and seeing how that all works out.
I hear you, what you're saying about the Green Party, and they've really lost their traction by fighting. And we're talking about the federal Green Party now.
Correct, yeah.
Lost their traction fighting about their leadership. I still think Elizabeth May is going to win if she's very popular in the riding. Yeah. And in Victoria, if she runs, and I understand she's going to, but we like these outlier characters. We had Scott Wallace was the MLA in Oak Bay for years, and he was a conservative. He was the only conservative in the legislature. He wasn't going to help anybody, but people like that independent voice. And they felt the same way about Andrew Weaver for a long time in Oak Bay, because he was going to stand up for something that they believed in principle was the right move. And Weaver's gone back to the university. I don't know what the long-term prospects are for the Green Party in BC, but I do think people out here on the West Coast like to have those independent voices, John.
Well, you're right about the outliers. Hey, people like us, people like me, apparently. So that's proof of that. I'll tell you, though, we just had a fantastic event finish off. What do you think about those Olympics?
Well, I thought the Olympics were exciting, especially the Canadian women. We had, 24 medals? And a lot of them were won by our women. They were amazing in the pool. They had gold, silver, bronze. They were amazing in rowing. I think we had the women's eights, which had several rowers from BC. Yeah. They won first time since I think it was 1992. Yeah. And that was exciting. There was a pair that won. And then we just rocked it in that soccer match. The final where Canada prevailed against the USA and then moved on to beat Sweden in penalty shots with 4.5 million people watching. It was fantastic.
The linkages have been established that over half of that Canadian Olympic team is somehow or another connected to the Pisces Olympic Training Sport Institute out here.
Yeah.
So folks around Lower Vancouver Island, which really represents the world, in my opinion, have had a significant impact on the success of these Olympics. It was weird, wasn't it? Like, no fans, yet so many inspirational, warm moments. I'm going to miss it. But Beijing, what, 6 months from now? We're going to have the summer. We're going to have the Winter Olympics.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So we're
kind of odd to think it's going to be in Beijing. I don't know if you've been there. There aren't a lot of big mountains around Beijing, but
right.
Anyway, who's to argue?
Right.
But, yeah, I know it was fantastic to see that, and fantastic to see Canadians get so excited from afar, arm's length, and our team came back without any COVID. So that was good news as well. So just a big thumbs up, and a thumbs up to Cleve Deansop, our local sports writer, who wrote tirelessly in the build-up and during the Olympic Games. And Cleve always does such great work. It was great having him on the show as a preview for the Olympics, and certainly a lot of his predictions came true. We did very well.
Well, so one could easily say that the Victoria Rumble Room predicted the Canadian Olympic team's success. That's what I'm going to say.
We're humble. We'll say it. We'll say it.
The Victoria Humble Room.
As opposed to the Victoria Bumble Room. Anyway, so a great show coming up here, John.
Yeah, I know.
In a moment's time, we're going to be talking to Ellis Ross from the Haisla First Nation, who went on to become an MLA and is now running for the leadership of the BC Liberals. And he's a very, very effective guy who's done very well by his own First Nation up in Kitimat. And we're going to ask him about economic development. We're going to ask him about the old growth dispute up in Fairy Creek, which also has a lot of issues around First Nations. The Pashadat would like the protesters to leave now, and they are remaining on their posts, and more arrests are taking place. We just had a major march taking place in the streets of Victoria, from the courthouse down to the legislature. First Nations supporters, and there were also activists along for the ride with that, and members of the Green Party to boot, for the marking of the Day of World Indigenous People, and also the 1-year anniversary of that protest up at Fairy Creek. The blockades have continued for a year. There have been hundreds of arrests. And it's worth noting, while protesters submitted a 150-name petition demanding that all old growth foresting and logging cease, there were arrests taking place up at the blockade site. So more people were arrested even while the protest was happening. Ellis Ross has been up to that protest site. He has spoken to the protesters. He has spoken to the Pashadat, and he's going to give us his thoughts on what he thinks is going on up there and what needs to happen. And it's a real culture clash, John. Yeah. Speaking of culture clash, we have had, I think, not a clash so much, but we've had a situation where a lot of our cultural institutions have really been high and dry in the face of COVID. Numbers have been down. It's been life support for a lot of our favorite cultural institutions in the province. And one of them is Craigdarroch Castle. John Hughes from Craigdarroch is going to be joining us a little later in the show to talk about how they've managed to cope and get through this tough time. They've kept the doors open, limited staff, but they are gradually getting those doors open again. We have American tourists with double vaccinations coming back to the country. And it's going to be a trickle at first, but with any luck, there'll be bigger numbers coming down the road. And we're going to hear about right now how things are improving, maybe in some respects improving because we've had all these forest fires in the interior, so people are coming to the island. That's too bad. Not happy to see that. Love to see everybody pulling out of this COVID-19 pandemic at the same time, John.
Several months ago, Robin, I thought we were out of it. I thought that we'd beaten this thing and it would be somehow normalized. And now we're sitting looking at a potential fourth wave. And it's because people aren't getting vaccinated. Come on, everybody. What is the problem?
Well,
I don't know how we can articulate this anymore.
I do agree with that, in the sense that I'd like to see the people that are still anti-vaxxers get their head around the fact they really should get vaccinated. But, you can't say that too loud in general, John, because Canadians are rallying like very few other countries are rallying. We have the highest vaccination rate per capita in the world.
Yeah,
And one of the biggest places for getting vaccinated is on Vancouver Island. I mean, but Canadians across the country are really jumping on board.
I get it.
We have our holdouts. We have our holdouts, and we need to get that message out. We want to get herd immunity. I think it's going to take up to 90% to really get herd immunity, where we can stop worrying and looking over our shoulder about these variants. So
I'm with you. You know, I still have a hangover from my trip a little while ago into the interior, and where we're walking around, my wife and this other couple, and nobody's wearing masks, and the great bulk of the current COVID numbers are coming from the interior.
Yeah,
I get it, but we need to continue to encourage and promote vaccinations. But I'm telling you something else. We lived and drove through those forest fires. We drove through some places that have since been burned down. Yes. And as tragic as that is, there are folks out in the forest working day and night to try to stop those forest fires. Not only do we have medical professionals and first responders, we have forest fire personnel, all of these folks putting their lives on the line. So I think all of this is just causing me, likely folks are going to tell, I'm quite emotional about this. So many people are working 2, 3, 4 times as hard as they would ever work to help all the rest of us. Let's do our bit and get vaccinated and get to a new normal.
Yeah, we don't want to see another Lytton in central BC. I was very relieved to see that Vernon was spared. They were talking about evacuating Vernon, which is a pretty large city. I think it's 45,000 people, and they were able to retract on that call to evacuate. And I'm relieved for them. That's a beautiful part of the province. And as you say, John, there's a lot of people fighting very hard to do something about stopping those fires. So big thumbs up to them.
Yeah.
And now it's time for our first guest, John. I think it's pretty exciting. Ellis Ross is going to soon be in the building.
Soon going to be in the Victoria Rumble Room.
Rumble Room.
Ellis Ross. I was introduced to Ellis a while ago through an event that you had organized in Vancouver, and I was blown away when I listened to him and thought, wow, this gentleman has some new ideas, and particularly around Indigenous relationships with the rest of the community and the rest of the community. Ellis Ross currently he's an MLA for Skeena, way up there, Northern BC. He is running as a candidate for the leadership of the BC Liberal Party. An accomplished Indigenous leader as chief counselor of Haisla, helped deliver a $50 million agreement with Kitimat LNG. And as I think we're going to hear, has already strongly benefited his community in that entire area through his activities, implementing economic development policies. That's a passion of mine. I can't wait to hear his viewpoints and what he proposes to advocate for the province of British Columbia on our behalf. Let's zoom in. MLA Ellis Ross.
And now joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room is Ellis Ross. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, guys. Glad to be here.
Ellis Ross, you're an Indigenous leader. You're from Kitimat, former chief counselor of the Haisla First Nation. Tell us what this cancel culture means to you. What do you think about the talk that we're seeing about British Columbia should change its name, or even Victoria should change its name, because somehow that's all linked to a past that's colonialist and a settler culture?
Well, overall, I don't believe in that sentiment. I don't believe in that narrative. Reconciliation actually talks about the idea of two societies coming back together, for the better of both parties. And canceling culture, when Canada as a young country itself really has no culture. They're trying to develop as we speak. And I've always said that if you're going to talk about culture, don't tear it down, don't tear it apart. History is what it is, but add to it. add to some of the things that you're seeing and reading, whether you're talking about a statue or what's being taught in our schools or out in the general public. You don't have to tear apart your culture, your history, but add the components that you think are really important that actually contextualize what really happened to not only to Aboriginals, but the Asians, the Indo-Canadians, to Irish Canadians. Use that as an example to show the hardships of what it means to be a young country.
I don't think there's a lot of pushback on things like changing the Queen Charlotte Islands to Haida Gwaii, and people seem quite comfortable to refer to Georgia Strait now as the Salish Sea. I don't think that there's a massive pushback on some of these ideas. There's, I think, a real openness to trying to include more First Nations reference and culture. And I think people then feel somehow that they're being accused as a society about some bad things that did happen in the past that we really can't control at this point.
Yeah, but you know what? In my perspective, I'm really grateful for the life that I've been able to achieve in BC. And when I'm looking at these kinds of issues, like changing in BC, for example, we've got much bigger fish to fry. We've got forest fires that are burning up the interior of BC. We've got the unaffordability of millennials trying to buy their first home. We've got so many different issues at our doorstep. Why are we allowing ourselves to be distracted with these political causes? I'm not going to take my eye off the ball in this respect. I think, I've had a great life in BC, even though I struggled. But I also want to make sure that life is even better for our future British Columbians. So I just think that the name change and all this other stuff, the distractions, that might work for other politicians for a vote. I will not go down that road.
Ellis, such an honor to have you on our show. You and I have now chatted on numerous times online. We're so honored and respectful that we have your leadership and your voice, not just within the BC Liberal Party campaign, but the general BC dialogue on so many issues. I'd like to talk a little, sort of build upon the conversation you guys have just had, and around the unmarked graves that have been found at the residential schools. I'm going to talk about it from my perspective, a white man's perspective, and how it hasn't been, it's neither right or wrong, it's neither naive or not. But this is for some of us the very first times that we've heard about some of these historical injustices. And so, and then to Robin's point, when I talk about those with other folks, some of my First Nations friends locally, I'm hearing terms like colonialists and settlers. And I was even challenged by where did my parents come from? When did they come here? I don't know how to react to this. I want to help. I want to be involved. But tell me, give us some advice. Your thoughts around how this all can work for all of us. Now you're now a provincial leader, hopefully a premier. Give us some feedback, please.
This is all political narrative. And yeah, I've heard these colonialist arguments myself over the last 5 years at least. That's when it's really seemed to come to the forefront. And then I argue both sides. On the one side, I say, yes, there were some bad things that happened, but there's a lot of good. And when I'm talking to these people that actually really despise my position or even despise me, I ask.
That can't be.
There's more out there. I ask, which part of the colonial society do you want to discount? Which part? Is it the money system? Is it the new houses that we're living in? Is it electricity, natural gas? Is it the highways? Is it the medical system? Is it the clothes, the furniture, the cell phones, the computers? Because when I talked to my elders about this over 15 years ago, I asked them directly, would you like to go back to our culture? And they said no. Life was tough. I mean, you think about some of the basics. You think about there was no toilet paper back then. There was no running water. There was no sewage. So people would have to go down in the middle of winter, the men especially, and have to go down the beach and use the washroom. And when you really think about that context, who now in today's age will shun the luxuries of the 21st century, go out, shoot a deer, skin it, make some underwear, and then provide food, and do that every single day for the rest of their lives? Come on. You've got to admit, life was pretty damn good in the 21st century. So in terms of the colonialist narrative that's out there, how far do you want to take this? My parents went to residential school. They even praised some of the benefits of living in this day and age. So that's why I chalk this up to a political narrative. If there's something politically that you want to achieve, fine, great. Let me hear it.
Well, that's great to hear. Because I don't know the context of what a colonialist is. I like to think of myself as a Canadian. And I like to think of you and as a Canadian. And the First Nations colleagues in my area as Canadians. I happen to come from a Baltic area. My parents do. I have a culture of immigration. So does Robin. Yet we're all so good to hear the narrative. I'd like to hear this from you, that we're all in this together with respecting each other's cultures.
Well, the thing about it, John, is that I think it's the wrong term. And I think it's blame being placed on a general society, which is wrong. I don't use the word colonialists or settlers in terms of what happened to the First Nations. I use the term government policies from 100 years ago. That's what it really was. I mean, and those policies were racist to everybody. It wasn't just First Nations. Those policies are gone. They're all gone. I know, but the aftermath is still affecting First Nations today.
Yeah.
And this is what I've been trying to achieve in terms of fixing those outcomes, in terms of unemployment, poverty, the violence of poverty, children going into government care, suicides, people going into prison.
Yeah.
And if you come to Kitimat, you'll see for the most part, we've actually fixed those issues. And it had nothing to do with government programming. It had nothing to do with council programming. It was just us shifting our focus away from the political narrative of the day and just saying, what if we got this entire generation into the employment force? What would happen? Let's give it a shot. And it did. And, most of our issues have gone away.
It's a good lesson to be learned by a lot of other First Nations. And you're in an enviable location geographically, that you happen to be at a port where now LNG can be shipped. You think about the Heisler are in an advantageous spot, the Tsleil-Waututh are in an advantageous spot, the Squamish band. There are bands that are in a really good place to benefit from the overall economy. What do you say to people like the Pashadat, who are out by Port Renfrew, who've been in the middle of this old growth forest dispute for the last year? There's going to be a parade. Actually, I believe the parade has already taken place. The International Day of World Indigenous People. They're marching from the courthouse to the legislature. And hereditary chief from the Kwakutl, Chief Dave Mungo Knox, is one of the speakers. There's a Pashadat elder named Bill Jones. Elizabeth May and Paul Manley from the Green Party are there. So this is all around marking the first anniversary of the protests taking place at Fairy Creek. Hundreds of people have been arrested. You've been up there. What do you make of that dispute? And do you have a lot of sympathy for what the Pashadat are facing?
I have an incredible amount of emotions toward the political scheme overall in Canada and BC, in terms of how they are actually disrespecting democratically elected First Nation leaders. It's incredible to witness this in Canada. A country based on democracy and freedoms, the ability for a person to choose their own leader. But that actually speaks for every other Canadian and British Columbian in general, but that doesn't actually translate to First Nation communities. This is a travesty. I mean, you look at our political leaders in BC and the NDP, and the federal government absolutely ignoring elected leaders in First Nation communities. Not only that, but ignoring the fact that female leaders in some of our communities who actually got booted out of the leadership scheme get ignored. I can't believe this is being allowed to happen. This is a story you'd probably hear in another country that isn't actually a democracy. I can't believe this is happening in BC.
There is some confusion, I think, from the wider community about who's in charge. And I've spoken, and we've had on the program people from Ferry Creek, some of the protesters, and there is a feeling that when they're dealing with the Pashadat, they're dealing with not necessarily the legitimate leaders, because these people represent the Indian Act, which isn't really a fair way for the First Nations to be represented. And so, I mean, right off the top, if they're not going to fully buy into the model that the First Nations themselves are following, it all collapses pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Oh, and that's the way you divide a community. You divide the community and you divide the leadership. And by the way, I did go down to the protest lines at Ferry Creek, and I did talk to a protester, and right to my face, this protester said to me, well, you know, the elected band council is not the legitimate leader because they're bought and paid for by the federal government. And I pointed out, I said, you know, I was an elected chief council for 6 years in my band. Previous to that, I was an elected council for 8. And I was part of a team that actually turned the fortunes of my community around to fix our social issues. I find your comment highly offensive. And then he started backtracking. Whoa, that's what I heard. and so I started saying, give me the name of who said that. Tell me, I want to know. And then well, you better go talk to a communications person. And then they admitted that they were learning just like everybody else. Well, if you're learning, why didn't you take the effort to go down to the community and actually talk to the elected leadership? Why don't you talk to the elected leadership of every single Native community in BC who's actually trying to do some really good things for a community? They're good people, they're honorable people, but they're being divided by external forces. And this is one of the most disadvantaged people in Canada. And this is disgusting how people utilize them just as pawns in their game.
But you still, I imagine, on the other side of it, must feel that there needs to be some answers about how we're going to go forward with old growth logging and how we're going to go forward with First Nations sharing in the decision-making of how we move on our logging and other industrial fronts.
Which we already do. I mean, the Pashadat, along with bands like my own, we signed a forest and range agreement with the provincial government over 13 years ago. And it describes how we, work together in terms of decision-making, as well as revenue sharing, as well as how we actually carry out our own economic development dreams in the fabric of BC. I mean, the forest and range agreement that John Horgan talked about in terms of giving more volume to First Nations, that was actually built upon an initiative that was created by the BC Liberals. That was our very first step into the economic development world as my band 13 years ago. We were over the moon. We were actually ecstatic that we were actually included in the forestry industry. And that was actually the first time a door had been opened for us. And then we started to realize there's more opportunity here, but we got to put down our swords. We got to stop blaming people, and we got to start collaborating.
Ellis, I'd like to build upon this economic development history that you've had and now vision that you're presenting to the province. The first time I met you was in Vancouver. You were speaking at a conference. I think even Robin might have been part of the organization of that conference. And I just watched you in awe as a leader of a nation and the economic development principles and opportunities that you provided, and you changed the quality of life for your people dramatically.
Well, originally I opposed economic development in all forms. And it wasn't until a fellow councillor told me that I should really review our social issues first before I make a decision, which I agreed to. And then when I started to see social issues, not only my own band, but bands all across Canada, I was shocked at 80% unemployment, high rates of suicide, incarceration, kids in care. I was shocked. And so I made a couple of conditions in my band. I said, I will support economic development, but number one, it's got to be done to higher environmental standards. Number two, it's got to deliver the promise of prosperity that we've been talking about. And so from then, I started to participate in every single environmental assessment in our region, as well as all the permitting. And I also had to review all these different concepts along with the adjoining business plans to kind of weed out who the ones who were just kicking tires versus the ones who were really serious. But in the back of my mind, every time I sat down to a meeting, I always thought, how is this going to translate to that person who has never had a job or an opportunity at a job? How is this going to affect their lives? And how can I get those people into those positions? And so, I kind of took that to the next level. when I realized I could actually do this on behalf of my community as well. I could achieve my community's dreams of being independent, not self-governing, but independent, where we would not have to depend on government money anymore. Proud to say we're there. Everything that you see in terms of our community, we actually paid for with our own money coming out of resource development. By the way, when you see this kind of success, you don't have to beg for money anymore. Government actually comes to your door asking to be part of your success. They actually give you money. Whereas before, man, we'd send out applications for money all over Canada, and we'd go lobby government, and we'd get refused. My first trip to Ottawa, when I realized that's what I was doing, I was going to Ottawa to ask for money to repair our rec center. And I realized what I was doing. I came back to my band council, failure, of course. But I told my band council, I'm not doing that again. I'm not going out to ask for money. I'm not going out to beg for money. I wasn't raised like that. Never going to do that again.
I do want us to sort of tie back into the wider provincial issues, because we only have you for a short time on this interview. And as you mentioned, you were very briefly the minister also responsible for housing, and you have just issued a new poll that says that 46% of people who own homes and 26% of people who are renters in British Columbia are actually considering leaving the province because it's getting so expensive to live here. Now, the BC Liberals were in government for many years, and this was a problem then too. This isn't a new problem. This has been an ongoing issue for a long time in British Columbia. Really, it all started, I think, back in the 80s when we first had the first wave of new residents coming over from Hong Kong, and real estate started to go up from that. And it's just built and built and built. People from Hong Kong, people from the rest of the country flooding in. And it just seems with the low interest rates, there's no end in sight. Do you have some new insight or new plan on how we're going to deal with this in the future?
Well, I've been around Vancouver, and I've been around all the neighboring communities as well, Maple Ridge, Abbotsford, and everybody's talking about the same issue. And when you talk about this issue, you're really talking about supply. I mean, let's face it, BC is a great place to come. It's very attractive. And when you look at the affordability of other cities around the world, it's still affordable for those that have money. It's not affordable for millennials growing up in BC. And the communities I went to, it's almost like we're limiting the supply. It's either based on policy in municipalities, or it's based on politics. Because in certain cases, like say Abbotsford, for instance, you can't expand outward. You're restricted by farmland. You can't expand. So the only solution to me is, okay, how come you're not building upwards? In a place like Maple Ridge, for example, the argument there is you can't expand outwardly because there's some farmland, but there's actually some environmentally sensitive land that you can't expand onto. So the question becomes, okay, expand up. In Vancouver, and talking to the young people, it dawned on me that saying, well, really what they're really looking for is accommodation. They're looking to buy a house, number one goal. If they can't do that, it's a condominium. If they can't do that, they want to rent in a place where they want to work and live. But when you look at the restrictions on the supply, I mean, one of the arguments there is, why can we not build upwards in relation to transit? That's a good question. Why not? And I think for at some point, there's got to be a politician that comes up and says, yes, for a period of time, I'm going to have to be the bad guy and say, yes, we got to get rid of these policies that restrict us from building upwards.
Ellis, I could talk to you for hours. We could talk to you for hours. So unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. Maybe one day over some beers or something like that. But a final question for you. Forest fires, okay? So a week ago, 10 days ago, I had a brief holiday in Vernon. I witnessed what so many British Columbians are now struggling with and in crisis over. The fires everywhere, threatening lives. This is now an annual crisis. I mean, every year and I couldn't help but say, why the hell isn't this the mission critical issue of the day?
Well, I've got to admit that when this happened in Williams Lake in the Caribou region a year ago, 2 years ago, I was actually pretty naive. I was pretty ignorant. But in watching Facebook, and listening to the accounts, I mean, you got to admit, our firefighters are doing a great job. I was actually part of a firefighting crew for a short period of time. We had a fire unit crew out of our village, and I understood, what a dangerous job that is, what a important job that is. What I couldn't understand though was, is it true what these people are saying, and saying that, okay, they reported the fire, then they watched it burn. That can't be true. And then you read more accounts of it. And then, so finally I got fed up the other morning. I got up and did a video and saying, look, if what these people are saying is true, what are we doing? I mean, back in my day, the government would actually go around to the bars and drag guys out of the bars and throw them into a bus and get them out there to start fighting fires. I actually read an account of where a guy, a rancher, an old timer rancher, spotted a fire beside a road that was close to his community. So what did he do? He went home, got his bulldozer, and put it out. And this was after reporting it. I have no issue with the firefighters. I have no issue with that. My question to the government is, when a fire is reported and there is actually extremely dry conditions, and you've had it for the last few weeks now, why are we not actually surgically attacking these fires when they're small, when we have a chance? Is that not built into our system? I keep hearing that this is the way of the future, more forest fires. Okay.
Well, it's not like this is some kind of new phenomenon for BC. Logging and forests have been the number one economic driver for 100 years. Like,
fires have been going on for years and years now. We've had fires every year.
Without a doubt. And you hear all the philosophies in terms of how we have to do better forest management, have to do fire breaks. We have to do, I'm all for that. Great. But in the meantime, when a forest fire gets reported, and it's, say, 5 kilometers away from my community, and I phone it in, and after maybe 10 hours, I sit there and watch that fire grow bigger and bigger and bigger, it just makes sense to me. I say, okay, isn't there some type of crew that is first responders, we'll get somebody out there, and we'll get the helicopters dumping water. Maybe we'll actually utilize local resources, local experience, local knowledge. I mean, I'm watching this private firm called Safeguard on Twitter, and they're talking about how they've actually been effectively putting out fires and saving communities, saving homes. Well, wait a minute. How come this is not being utilized? How come I don't know about it? And this is all done without putting any firefighters in danger.
Right.
And you know what? I don't know about you, but these people that are out there fighting fires, number one, that's extremely dangerous. But I understand the emotion behind it when they're trying to save their community, their home. But where is that frustration coming from? I mean, if they watch a fire and they think that after maybe 8 hours nothing's being done, now I got to do something. Mm-hmm. And now this mistrust is actually starting to spread. I think this is dangerous.
Yeah.
I think we've got to address the idea of really quick response to put out a fire when it's smaller. And I want to know, okay, why aren't we doing that?
Yeah.
And I'm one of those guys that said, yeah, I thought we were doing that.
I want to be able to wrap this up around the election of a new leader for the BC Liberals, which I'm sure you appreciate. This is a marathon. I mean, they're not even going to have the vote until early next year. So it just goes on, which is a good thing in the sense there's lots of issues you can peel the onion on. And it's a bad thing in the sense that it's just the hard work and fatigue that's going to go on for an awful long time. And I guess what I'm asking is, the Liberals last year suffered a crushing defeat to the NDP. They didn't have their ducks in a row. Might be questions about the leadership, might be questions about the messaging, but that isn't that long ago. There's a widespread belief out there, I believe, in the province that the NDP and John Horgan have really relied on Dr. Bonnie Henry. That's received a lot of very favorable press and I think favorable response from the public. In other words, they're giving the government of the day pretty high marks at how they've handled COVID, especially in comparison to other parts of the world and even other parts of Canada. So that works in favor of the current government. And, John Horgan himself has received fairly high approval ratings. There's been polling of the premiers across the country, and he's one of the most popular at the moment. So these are all things that really have to be overcome. And that's going to be a lot of hard work to do that How do you feel about the race, and how do you feel about that objective of trying to go after a government that seemed to be doing, well, I think by at least public opinion standards, pretty well?
Yeah, and COVID did take over the news of every jurisdiction in the world, basically. So any leader that was in that position is actually living on that magic carpet ride for a while. But you know what? In terms of the promises, in terms of what's happening in BC coming out of COVID, I mean, you just got to look at some of the young people talking about affordability in Vancouver. I mean, this issue is going to come back sooner or later. And right now, affordability on an NDP has actually gone up. And to me, it was just common sense. As a layman sitting here in Kitimat, I said, you know what? If you increase rates and taxes to the business community or other entities, you know, those entities actually just pass on those extra costs to the consumer or the ratepayer, taxpayer. Doesn't anybody really understand that's how affordability actually works, a part of the affordability? And now with all the increasing the cost of living here, and, you know, especially in Vancouver, when do people actually shift their thinking away from the COVID into really their quality of life going forward?
Yeah.
Really, what I'm thinking about is going into every single riding and actually answering this question and actually fixing something that I've heard as a criticism against the BC Liberals. We stopped listening. Now, I've only been here since 2017, but I do know how to listen. And I think that's the first thing you got to do when you're actually trying to turn things around. I did it for my community, and on top of that, I changed my views, and then I changed my community views. But it all starts from listening. And I've listened to the ideas of changing demographics within BC, changing demographics within Vancouver versus Maple Ridge, Abbotsford, Surrey. I've listened. And so I think that's how we do this, one riding at a time, one community at a time, and basically say to the people that, look, if it's change you're looking for in terms of the BC Liberals, if it's change you're looking for in terms of the provincial government, then I've done it before. I've changed, and it's easy to say, really hard to accomplish. It's not a pretty thing to actually go through change, and I'm willing to do it again. I'm willing to take those shots and the negativity around it, but I really think in the end, you know, the goal is actually worth it if we come out stronger as a province.
Wow, so great to hear a leading Indigenous voice provincially who speaks for the province, who increasingly probably speaks for the nation. We certainly wish Ellis Ross the best of luck on his campaign trail. And for those of you that might have noticed, I hope you have, I have a shirt behind me hanging up. And
it's back there somewhere.
Yeah. And that shirt has a symbol, you might not can read it. Every child matters. That is being worn by a lot of folks, representing an attitude that we respect and that we understand or are trying to understand, and that we are wanting to be part of a reconciliation between ourselves and our First Nations communities. There are increasingly episodes and events of unmarked graves being exposed across Canada. There are murdered children in those graves. There are sick children in those graves. There are children that have not been linked to any families for decades. On this show, on the Victoria Rumble Room, you and I have demonstrated that we care about these issues. We will continue to talk about these issues openly and honestly.
Well said, John. And that is definitely a focus. Economic development has always been big with us in terms of our First Nations, handing the First Nations the tools they need to proceed and progress, but never forgetting that they've had a tough time. There's been a difficult transition for the First Nations people, and it's been an ongoing issue for a long, long time, over 100 years. And there's no question there were mistakes in the past. At some point, we want to see reconciliation. That means coming together as all Canadians want to do, and that includes our First Nations. So good on you for having the shirt to remind us that we're all in this together, and we're all accountable, and we'll all hopefully be able to move forward. And we're not picking sides, John. We're not picking sides with Ellis Ross. We're not picking sides in the federal election. We're just trying to get these important issues out in front of people and get voices on that we think are representative of positive action taking place. So, you know, we're not Debbie Downers on this program, John. We're trying to bring out positive ideas and hopefully help people be inspired a little bit and progress.
Well, there are two things that have been highlighted to me in the act and process of reconciliation or dialogue with First Nations. One of them is being honest. Being honest, don't hide back, be accountable for what you're thinking. And that is what you and I do. And then secondly, to admit we don't know what to do. We don't know how this works. And therefore, we are asking and discussing and debating. We're not just going to sit back and go, okay, yeah, we're just all going to be friends. That's not how this works. And I'm really proud to be part of a dialogue with you and others in which we are genuinely trying to figure out this complex Canadian relationship.
Absolutely, John. And it is complex, but it's what makes the show interesting.
Yeah, right.
Gets us out of bed every morning trying to think about how do we peel this onion?
Yeah.
And, you know, we're going to be peeling different onions, including, I think, the important stories that are really meaningful to a lot of us and a lot of Canadians, and that is heritage. Yeah. And I know that's part of this debate with the First Nations, but it's, you know, the cancel culture. I don't like the cancel culture. I want us to learn about our culture.
Yes.
I remember in the old days when we looked at the history books and people would complain, well, Canada doesn't really have any history. Well, I think we have a rich history, both positive and negative. We have a lot of things to learn about. And one of the places, it's a bastion of learning about both mistakes made and also triumphs made in our region is Craigdarroch Castle.
Totally.
Right in the heart of the city, which represents so many layers of the city's growth, because it wasn't just the Dunsmuirs who built it. It was also a hospital after the First World War. It was part of Victoria College. Pierre Burton studied there. It was a school board office. It was a music conservatory. It's been so many iterations over the years, and it's a jewel that's really needed some polishing because the COVID pandemic has hit the castle very hard over the last year and a half. They've gone down to a skeleton staff, but they are still living and breathing. And their executive director, John Hughes, is with us in the Rumble Room to talk about Craigdarroch Castle and what's going to happen as we move forward. And joining us now in the Rumble Room is John Hughes. And John, it's fantastic to get you on the show.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, I know that you've been working hard to keep the doors open and keep the lights on despite the COVID-19 pandemic. How would you describe business right now this summer?
Well, it certainly picked up. I mean, since the travel restrictions have eased and the province is allowed to travel a bit further than they were at the beginning of the year, and now Canada opening up, we've certainly seen an increase in visitors. You know, we were down to about 30 people a day, 3 days a week, and we're pushing probably about 180 people a day through those 3 days a week, which is a significant increase for us.
John, I've just met you for the first time. I've been to the castle before. Actually part of a Chamber of Commerce event, which rented the castle for I think an AGM maybe, or an AGM post.
We did the chair's Christmas thing one year. And it may be in an AGM as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's actually leads into my question. Like most local people, they love the castle. If they have a chance to go and see, it's a true community treasure. I'm so glad we're interviewing and highlighting this today. And of course, that lends itself to has local traffic sustains the castle during the pandemic. I'm quite sure it's been tough and challenging. What has the Castle Society had to do, I guess, ostensibly to keep the lights and doors open this past 18 months?
Yeah, it's been a struggle. I mean, I have to say a wholehearted thank you to the local market, because people have come out, they have visited, folks have come through and said, you know what, I was here when I was younger, now the kids are at the right age, and we thought we'd bring them out here and give them a tour, and that's been great. But honestly, there are not enough people on the island to sustain things.
Right.
Normally we would be doing 150,000 people a year, and as nice as the Victorian market has been to us, it's still a challenge.
Yes.
And the board of directors and I, in September of last year, sat down and made the difficult decision to start laying off staff and to reduce our operating overheads. And that was probably one of the more difficult things I've had to do in my career, is to let 15 people, sort of wait on the sidelines until things improved. That being said, I mean, we're down to 6 staff. We're still able to keep the doors open. We're still showing the castle. We're still working on conservation and restoration projects. And we're very, very hopeful for the future and how things are going to be going and evolving as we start to rebuild and reconnect with a broader market.
In terms of how you're operating now and how you'll be operating over the rest of the summer, I know that there's been a lot of COVID protocols in place. If you were to tour right now at the castle, you'd be expected to wear a mask, keep your hands clean, all the things we've been doing steadfastly now for over a year. John, do you intend that to continue indefinitely, or how long do you continue to keep those protocols up? I know we're not likely to have a deluge of folks coming from outside of Canada, and a lot of Canadians now have had at least one, and a lot of people are getting their second vaccine. So you would think it's going to be safer. How soon is it safer for you?
That's an ongoing question. We bring this up every sort of 2 or 3 weeks at staff meetings. Part of the decision to continue to wear masks at this point in time was to deal with and address the staff's comfort level, because, as you say, many people have had their first and some are getting their second. PHO guidelines are after your second week, you're considered vaccinated and safer. So we're essentially allowing our staff, and I'm sure many of our visitors are in the same situation, that 2 to 3 week, 4 week window where they've got a chance to have their second shot and feel far more comfortable. So we'll revisit that question about masks being mandatory or recommended, every couple of weeks until we get to a level where we are all comfortable. Certainly, I would suggest that by the time we hit the stage 4 in September, I believe it's the 7th, if things are still looking good, then chances are it would be recommended. For myself, I'm working the door a lot. I'm doing the introductions, when you're speaking, and if it's loud, I'm projecting a lot. I'm concerned about what I'm spreading for people. I may continue to wear a mask, but we may not require our guests. So it's evolving, as everything is in COVID these days. But at some point, I can see that masks may become recommended rather than mandatory.
And if I'm watching this and I want to go to Craigdarroch Castle, is it generally speaking open now? Is it open most days? How often are you open? I know there's been a gradual ramp up. Where are we with that?
So we're still only doing tours 3 days a week. So that's the Friday, the Saturday, and the Sunday. Other 2 days a week, we're looking after conservation work, again, with a very small staff. We only have so many hours we can allocate to looking after those things. And we are really requesting and encouraging people to book online at thecastle.ca. Again, the tours, because we are starting to see a lot more activity, they sell out. If you do happen to walk up and there's room, we'll try and accommodate you. But we have had people have to wait an hour or 2 hours to get in. So pre-booking means that you're guaranteed a spot and you'll get in the door. Particularly useful if you're coming over from the mainland and you've taken a ferry all the way here. We're encouraging people to do that. My hope is that as things go along through the summer, we might be able to add a few more tours on those 3 days and or open up another day. And again, we're managing that based on staffing levels and how much we can actually physically handle.
Yeah. John, over the last, I guess now 6 months, Robin and I have interviewed numerous sectors around the region, including tourism, hospitality, the Downtown Victoria Business Association. The impact of lack of cruise ship traffic has been extraordinary. It's such a determinant to revenue for so many of these sectors, including traffic to the castle. The feds have announced that cruise ships will be allowed back in BC waters for the next season. Is there any are they going to come to Victoria? Are they not? What is your sense? What have you heard amongst your insiders on how that's going to work? Is this Jones Act going to be, a Jones Act death knell for us?
I haven't heard anything. I think there's been a lot of concern that if the ban stayed in play too long, that then definitely we would lose out and they'd find a workaround and the Jones Act would not necessarily come back into play. I'm pleased that the federal government has moved quicker and that they can start planning next season now, which is typically when they would be doing it. Our cruise operators and tour operators would be looking for prices for next year at this time of year. So very timely. Whether they come back, what they look like, I really have no sense of it, and I haven't heard from any of the tour operators at this point.
Okay, well, we'll keep our fingers crossed for you there, John. Now, people who are local or people visiting from other parts of Canada who want to come to Craigdarroch, what would they want to come and see right now, John? Are there some things there that you think they should really be excited to go check out? I know there's a big kitchen operation going on. Maybe you could cover a few of the things that people might want to see if they come to the castle.
Sure. I think now actually is a really nice time to come to the castle. First of all, because traffic is a little bit lower, your experience is a tad more personal. You don't have people getting in the way of your photographs, unless, of course, I happen to open the front door just as you're taking a picture, in which case, hello, I'm in your picture. But no, I think, you get a chance to see the opulence that the wealth that the Dunsmuirs created is there. You get to experience that. I mean, we've got 8,500 objects in our collection, and probably 60% of that is on display. So there's a lot to look at, whether it's architectural details or objects or fabric art, that kind of stuff. But interestingly too, as you mentioned, the kitchen project, when you get to the very end of the tour, visitors get a really good look at how challenging it is to put the place back together, how challenging it is to tell a story, what information we're actually lacking, and how we approach the rooms that are actually finished that they've already seen. So it's kind of a unique time to take a tour. It's a very significant project. There's a lot of behind the scenes, like you're looking at floorboards, you're looking at brick walls, you're looking at holes in the ceiling, and it's we like to tell people, just how much is involved in doing this, and seeing the pretty end results is one thing, but it takes a lot of effort to get there.
Effort and guesswork, because we don't actually know exactly what was in that kitchen when the building was built.
Right.
That's right. We're back down to actually marking nail holes and trying to understand where walls are and seeing if we can find gaps in those walls that might indicate where doors are. So yeah, I mean, we're right back to the beginning.
So John, as we wrap up this discussion about this extraordinary Victoria landmark, this summer marks the 150th anniversary of BC joining Canada. Robert Dunsmuir hadn't even started thinking about building a Craigdarroch Castle,
no.
But he was certainly thinking of ways to expand his coal mining business through Confederation. How did he benefit? How did Robert Dunsmuir benefit from BC joining Canada?
I think ultimately it started out like 1870. He was opening his first coal mines, and at the end of that year, he sold the first 180 tons of coal to the Royal Navy. Proved out to be good quality coal. And then, as Canada or as BC joined a confederation, the Mineral Act changed, which meant Robert had to rethink his business. He had one that was viable, but it didn't give him all the benefits of the new act. One of the things required him to have a bigger company and more people on the board, something he wasn't necessarily happy about doing, but he bit the bullet on that one and decided, yep, let's go ahead and do this. And that's, I think, where he benefited, because what that provided was access to the sea, regardless of what other rights existed prior to the new act taking place. And he had already developed storage wharves on the water, and he was at risk of losing that. Being able to build his business out and to maintain that access to the sea, and then open up sales offices in San Francisco and so on, I think that's ultimately where it was. It wasn't until 1881 that he started thinking about a railroad and expanding his ability to move his product. And of course, by that time, the federal government had promised a railroad, and the way things worked out, Robert ended up building that railroad. Interestingly, though, it was an American company that got the charter to build the railroad, but things fell apart financially. So it defaulted back to Robert's original proposal, which was tweaked. And of course, he benefited from doing that. And being Robert, he understood vertical integration. So he owned the steel foundry that built the rails for the railroad and so on and so forth. So, I mean, yes, but I think it probably started with that changes to the Mineral Act and that requirement that he actually get serious and bigger about his business.
And he got bigger and he became richer. And that's why he built the castle, right, John?
Yes, indeed. A statement of wealth and an opportunity to get the last three daughters married off perhaps a little higher in society.
Hey, Robin, great to see Victoria landmarks like the Craigdarroch Castle still operating. That's very important. And moving towards a brighter future. I mean, we're all thinking that way, but our tourism sector has been hit hard. I mean, really hard. And I think we're starting to see, positive green shoots around the region. I hope Craigdarroch Castle is one of those. We need to ensure that this essential landmark continues to operate. And as per my earlier comments, we need people to get vaccinated. So all of this.
We're going to get some of these double vaccinated Americans because they love coming to Craigdarroch Castle. And I want to again tip my hat at the provincial government for coming forward with more funding for Craigdarroch and several other of our big institutional gems that are, hanging on, these cultural landmarks, both in Victoria and Vancouver and other places, because without that extra funding, I think it's really tough. It's really tough to keep the doors open, but I think we're all going to benefit in the long run by having a vital cultural sector as tourism comes alive again in the province. And so it's great.
And we can't emphasize that enough. I believe that we've had many shows highlighting our heritage institutions, highlighting our culture. I don't entirely see that happening in too many other instances or media platforms. So I'm very proud to showcase these to our now emergent 2 or 3 billion person public.
That's right. Well, and we're talking about culture, but we're now going to be shifting over to politics again next week because we have Sean Holman joining us. And Sean Holman is today teaching politics and teaching journalism, mainly journalism, I guess, but I'm throwing politics in because that's what we're going to ask him a lot of questions about.
Right.
Journalism at Mount Royal University in Calgary. But Sean was a government relations consultant in Victoria for a number of years. And I used to be on a regular Shaw TV talk panel with him. Stephen Andrew was the host, and often it was myself and Sean Holman with our blazing rhetoric in response. And it was a heck of a lot of fun for me. It was within a couple of years of leaving Czech television, I was working as a consultant in Victoria, but it was fun to have an outlet where I still got to go on a TV screen. And it was a very popular show. And I think it helped launch Stephen Andrew off in his journalism. And of course, now he's successfully moved into civic politics. But
yeah, hopefully he'll stay.
I haven't spoken to Sean Holman in quite a while, but I've been following him closely and some of the things he's writing about. And a lot of it's around the environment. And of course, the environment and global warming is going to be a hot topic, so to speak, in this federal election. So I'm going to be asking Sean about that. I'll be asking Sean about the political landscape in a place like Alberta, which has always been so Tory blue. I can't see that changing, but I'll be interested to hear his thoughts on that. So Sean Holman will be on next week.
Sean, isn't that something, how we've got these sort of overlapping worlds and historical contexts? For those, that have heard me over the years, some folks have likely thought, what the hell, how come you keep yapping so much, Juricic? But anyway, I've been doing podcasts. We're now evolving into vodcasts. But my first one 7 years ago was with Sean Holman. It was Paul Holmes, myself, and Sean. So that's fantastic, to come back to that and chat with him next week. And to some degree, see where the political media landscape has gone, and then as yourself, I somehow or another got on to CFAX, which was originally Sean's show. It was sort of a weekly political
right. I remember
that chat room, and then he got his job in Alberta, and I was on CFAX for a while until they booted me off. Can't imagine why. But I'll tell you something, over the years, over all of these years, now 7, there's sort of a consistent theme. And that being, somebody likes to listen to me. Somebody likes to listen to us. I'm really quite surprised, Robin, at the amount of viewers that are listening to us.
So where are we doing well? Where's the viewership happening right now, John? Maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I guess, Ben, and indicate really how you can help promote the show and allow others to hear about some of these discussions that other folks aren't really tapping into. So above and below us are the links to our Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, right? Yeah, okay. And website. So take a look at all those. However, not on there, because we don't actually have it branded to the Victoria Humble Room yet, is a TikTok page that I post all of our 3-minute editorials, of which we've now had, maybe 3 or 4, maybe half a dozen. Holy mackerel, Robin, do we get a lot of activity there. And they're all yourself. One was Howie Siegel. And thousands of people are tuning in. Thousands of people. So if you are a TikTok follower and you're following John J59, that's when I was born, easy to remember. At some point, we're going to change that to Victoria Rumble Room, but not yet. You're going to notice these addresses. So you need to go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/VictoriaRumbleRoom.com, and like the page. We're at about 330 people already. We'd love to get that into the thousands, so that when I blither about how many people we have, it's actually true. You can join our Twitter page. You can follow us. You can like our YouTube videos, which are essentially all of these, but they're all inventoried there. Lots of ways to support the show. More importantly, you're not just supporting John and Robin, you're supporting discussions about Indigenous reconciliation issues. You're supporting cultural and heritage discussions. You're supporting ideas that are not generally covered in the media. So make a point of following us those certain ways, and
maybe share it with your friends.
Well,
maybe press the share button and send it on
with the friends would be great. It's sharing with, and but throughout all of this, from Sean Holman 7 years ago to today, still the Croatian sensation, Johnny, Boris, Ladislav Juricic. That's who I am.
And I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.